Welcome to Spinning Back Clique, where each week here at MMA Junkie, we take a spin through the biggest topics in the sport. This week, we've got gorgeous George Garcia from right here in Las Vegas with me, Nolan King up in Boston, and Danny Segura down in Miami. So let's just jump right into it, guys. This past Saturday night, we had three events going on almost simultaneously with UFC Fight Night 201, Bellator 274, and BKFC Knucklemania 2, which featured several MMA notables on the card. So I want to say, with all that going on, tell me, what was the most important result out of all the bunch of fight results? Or maybe if it's not the most important, maybe just the one that caught your attention the most, that really spoke to you. What was the thing that stood out of these three simultaneous events? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. George, you get it going.
Well, for sure, the UFC is the needle mover of the sport of, mixed martial arts. So it's easy to just gravitate towards that big KO by Jamal Hill. But I'll tell you what, like you said, John, Saturday asked a lot of us. Starting at 1 p.m. Pacific here is when the UFC started. Then BKFC Knucklemania 2 joined in. And then, of course, later on that night, Showtime presenting Bellator. And, boy, it took a lot out of me, because I watched them all. But at the very end, I was talking to Goes from Junkie Radio and just telling him, boy, there's really something about, when I was looking back at everything, about heat and the way it sells. And Julian Lane and Mike Perry, who were in MMA, their little feud drew me to that fight. I had to re-sign up for the Bare Knuckle app. And but I was very, very happy watching that. Of course, there was some other MMA fighters thrown in, but I think I zeroed in on that. And you know what? As they were promoting the UFC, everything that they're bringing together with Colby and Masvidal, heat, and then Jamal Hill saying, hey, I'm just going to knock out y'all heroes. And somewhere in there, I think someone partnered him up with Volkan Ozdemir. And then you wake up and see Volkan Ozdemir saying, well, I'm not convinced. And now those guys are feuding. I'm telling you, that's what draws me in. I don't mean to sound like a Neanderthal, like that's all I need. But there's something to that equation. So that's what I took away from Saturday.
Yeah, he does sell, and Mike Perry looks like he might be a star in BKFC for sure. Nolan, you were out there covering Bellator, a little bit of a special assignment, so I think I might know what your answer is going to be, but what did stand out to you the most this weekend?
Yeah, I had a different seat on Saturday night compared to what I usually have at Mohegan Sun, so I got to run with it. Brennan Ward, I was in his locker room kind of shadowing him for the duration of Bellator 274 from beginning to end. Him getting bumped up to the main card made us be there even longer. And so I got to see the anticipation build firsthand. It's something that, I've always read about, you hear fighters talk about, but for me personally, it's the first time I've got to witness that whole process. And obviously his backstory and, what that fight meant to him and the message that he's trying to send. I would be remiss not to mention it and kind of make it my pick since it was my assignment on Saturday night. But I do think it just goes to show you that MMA, we have such a different, unique opportunity to get to learn about these athletes and who they truly are, and some of these stories and these bigger messages and fighting for something greater than themselves. I mean, that's the type of stuff that I'm really intrigued by. It's the stuff that I think makes MMA so fun to cover. There's never a dull moment. Yes, people talk trash. Yes, they say inappropriate stuff sometimes. Yes, sometimes there's legal stuff, and it's fist fights after all. But at the end of the day, when somebody can go out there and fight and do so for to try to inspire others, or kind of try to inspire themselves too, use fighting as a mechanism to get their life back on track, I think that is very important within itself. And I think it's a lot more than we get from athletes in other sports as well. So I'm blessed to cover this sport. And I think Brendan Ward's win on Saturday was another example of just how great these athletes are.
Yeah, pretty amazing story. And I know you've got to look behind the scenes in the works for that. Danny, you were at BKFC, so was it something there that stood out to you or anything else?
Yeah, I think the biggest fight of the weekend had to be Mike Perry versus Julian Lane. I think it attracted the most eyeballs. There was the most fan interest there as well, and probably the best fighter or the most entertaining fight of the weekend as well. But I'd like to also shout out Chad Mendes. He had a huge win in his bare knuckle boxing debut, and I spoke to him afterwards, and he's like, look, I'm not sure if I want to continue doing this, but physically, I still feel in my prime. Physically, I feel like I have a lot more to give to the sport. So very interesting storyline. Let's not forget, he told me that he's still under UFC contract and he has three fights left on that deal. He's open to a UFC return if they're able to rework out some of the things on his deal. So who knows? I mean, the future is very interesting for Chad Mendes. Whether he'll continue with BKFC or go back to the UFC, I don't know. But definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, it was great to see Chad Mendez back in action. Put on a little bit of muscle. He's been in the gym a little bit since his retirement, man, but it looked good to see him. So a busy weekend to say the least, guys. Well, also this past week we saw the debut of PFL Challenger Series. Now, it's a brand new series, so maybe there's going to be some changes along the way as it unfolds. Maybe they'll tweak some things as it's happening. But based on your first viewing, I want to know, what's the feedback? Is there going to be a market for this? Does it look like something that's going to stick, or will some adjustments need to be made in order to really get the, kind of interest going in this thing? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Nolan, kick it off for us.
Yeah, as I said on Twitter, if you guys follow me during the fights, like, this is a product that would be made for somebody like me, crafted for it, right? The next breed, the generation of fighters on the come up, the prospects. And I think PFL's done a great job of scouting these guys. Like, some of the guys that they brought on for this thing, I think, are guys that I was like, man, those were guys the UFC should have grabbed. Josh Silveira is a perfect example. But they make it so hard for us to enjoy this product because of their pacing. I mean, it's killer. I'm willing to cut any sort of promotion slack for doing anything different and doing something that's similar to the Contender Series for PFL. No problem with it. I think it's great. It's another night of fights for fans. It's, theoretically should be short and sweet with just a few fights on the card. But to see them go out there and not learn from the mistakes of last year, I mean, the championship of last year, I feel like was kind of overshadowed by the fact that the pacing was so horrible for those 5-round fights. And, they start off with their first event of any sort this year, and it's the same issue. I mean, fans shouldn't have to watch, 3 hours of a broadcast to see 4 fights happen. It's just ridiculous. You're trying to bring in new viewers. You're not doing yourself any favors by having them sit around and watch commercials and promos and replays of the fights that just happened. Like, make it so it's an enjoyable experience that people want to come back and watch. And I think that's the part that frustrates me the most, is I know they have something good here and it's just being executed poorly.
Stern words, but I have to agree with you, to be honest with you. I mean, it's prospects, right? Yes, the hardcores like us are in it, but for casuals, it's going to be tough to get them in regardless, since they don't know the fighters. And now you're not having nonstop action because you're dragging it out a little bit. I think it's valuable feedback. Danny, what about you? Any feedback on the first episode?
Yeah, so I actually didn't get to watch it. I was obviously covering BKFC, and I was swamped with all that work. So I've just been catching up Sunday, and I'll do some of that today as well. On these events that I didn't get to watch. But from what I saw online, it seems the reaction was pretty positive as far as the actual product of the fight. But like Nolan said, the pacing, man, is killer, and we know that's everything. I mean, you're fighting for attention span, and we know that today in 2022, that's extremely difficult to get. And if you're just prolonging these fights, especially that they don't have a lot of well-known names, these are guys on the come up, it just makes the product a lot harder to go across and actually become something. So I think the pacing is everything. For example, I was covering BKFC and the pacing was insane. I was doing an interview and I would hear the other fight start already. And it just keeps the action nonstop. So I believe they have something going here. I think the more MMA, the better. I think it's good that they're bringing in these prospects rather than just trying to get free agents and UFC guys and stuff like that. So I think it has its place, but it'll probably deserve a few tweaks from the feedback that I saw online.
Yeah, well, just the fact that you didn't get to see it, it's a real problem for everybody, right? There's so much MMA out there, right? Yeah. You got to get people hooked, man. That's a very real battle they're going to be fighting. So, George, how about you? What'd you take away from it?
I would probably start with a different night. Weekends are a pretty valuable time for a lot of people, and I just presented how busy my Saturday was because of combat sports. So I would probably start with another night. And yeah, Nolan killed it with his explanation of the pacing. Like, you sit down and you're excited, you pop open a beer, got a sandwich ready, but the pacing just makes it really, really difficult for you to just hang in there, knowing that your Roku system and your satellite television has a lot of other different opportunities out there, because not all of us just like MMA. The celebrity judges, sure, I'll hear their input, but they're jumping around a lot. And another thing, man, please, MMA promotions, lean on your fighters to communicate better with your crowds. Learn some English. Josh Barnett used to drop some Japanese out in Pride. You see these concerts where Metallica will be in Buenos Aires, Argentina, and they'll speak and utter a few words in Spanish. Come on, fighters, bring it in English a little bit.
Is it ironic that we're talking about pacing and we went so far over the 4 minutes in that particular one? I don't know. It's funny. Guys, looking ahead to Saturday night's UFC Fight Night 202 headliner, Bobby Green has stepped up on short notice to face top contender Islam Makhachev. Now, it's hard to do anything but praise Green for being willing to take a challenge like this on short notice. But let's remember, Dan Hooker did a similar thing in October, and it did not work out so well for him. He's actually going to a new weight class now. So I can't help but wonder, if you were advising Green, would you have told him to take this opportunity? I mean, it's a gutsy decision, but is it a wise one in terms of his overall career trajectory? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. Dan, you kick it off.
Yeah, I think this is a terrible idea. But, you know, to be fair, I wouldn't advise 99.9% of the people in this world to go fight Islam Makhachev on short notice. But look, Bobby Green just had such a big win just a couple weeks ago. It seems the fans and the public are really getting behind him, something that we've noticed in recent years. I mean, you had John Anik, you know, campaign for a main event fight for Bobby Green. And I think the perfect fight was Renato Moicano versus Bobby Green. They both took incredible wins on the same night. I went to ATT, interviewed Renato Moicano. Moicano called them out. It just seemed like, hey, look, both these guys deserve a main event, full camp. It's a bit of a more favorable matchup with Moicano because he's willing to strike more. It just seemed perfect. And look, Bobby Green is not too young, but he does have that fan backing. So if I were his coach, I'm like, look, let's take a conservative route, win 2 more, 3 more this year, and then we're knocking on the title shot towards the end of 2022 or early start of 2023. But Islam Makhachev, it's a huge risk, and yes, it's a huge reward, but on short notice and just given his style. And, you know, right now we're speaking of Bobby Green and praising him, and look how sort of ballsy this is and all that, but all that's going to get forgotten after we get a result, after there's a loss. All that's forgotten. People are not going to remember you took the fight on short notice. Same thing with the Dan Hooker, Islam Makhachev situation. What we remember is not, hey, look how gutsy Dan Hooker was in taking this fight, but Islam Makhachev ran through Dan Hooker. That's sort of what we leave from that experience. So look, I think Bobby Green had momentum going, has momentum going, and I think that all can come to an end, obviously, in the fight against Islam Makhachev. But if he wins, obviously, that's going to be huge, and I assume a win over a top 5 guy would put him as a contender in the division. But all in all, I wouldn't advise him. Big stakes, big risk, but I think a more conservative approach would have been the right situation here.
It's interesting, right? Because, I mean, like I said, his stock's never been higher at Bobby Green, but it could go away or it could be amazing. George, what do you think? Good risk or not?
Yes, I think it is a good risk because 35 is a prime age for a heavyweight, but for a lightweight, that's up there. John, you and I were at the Honda Center. I guess back then it was called the Arrowhead Pond of Anaheim. And we watched Bobby Green fight Dan Lazon in 2009, over 13 years ago, for that Affliction Reckoning card. That's a long time this cat's been in the sport, and he's not really near a title shot in a division that has a lot of popular names that, you know, things can go in a different direction quickly, especially when the Poiriers and McGregors of the world are involved. So if he can steal everything Makhachev has earned by going out there and taking him out, and he was able to probably leverage, you know, some extra zeros on a paycheck, heck yeah, I think this is I think the juice is worth the squeeze, like they say.
I guess it's important to know, too, that Bobby has said he doesn't really care about a title shot, so maybe rankings don't mean anything. He just wants money. So, Nolan, is that why this is probably a good thing? Because George said he probably got some extra bucks in the back pocket?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly contributes to it. And I personally love it. I think that Bobby Green's stock has never been higher than it is right now. And I think a lot of people are expecting him to lose this fight, right? So he goes in there, he fights a guy that a lot of people like me think might be a champion down the line in Islam Makhachev. His you know, the risk of it is high for sure, but the reward is also way higher than that. You know, I think for Green, the time to do it is now. His stock's never been higher. Say he goes out there and he gets smashed in a minute. Like he got his first UFC headliner in. I think people will look at him as somebody that can be in those conversations with difficult fights. I mean, I think for Green, it was kind of a no-brainer. I mean, imagine if he goes out there and wins. I mean, think about that. So I think overall, good choice by Bobby Green and just adding to the legend of the King.
I was going to say, it's ballsy, man. It's a gangster move, and you got to praise him for it. It's a risky one, but if you want him to remember your name, that's what you got to do, right? So anxious to see how this plays out. And let's say, look, it's not a foregone conclusion. He can go in there and box a little bit. He's got some wrestling defense, so I'm excited to see how it plays out. Because Bellator 275 is also this weekend. It takes place in Dublin, and it's headlined by a middleweight title fight between champ Gegard Mousasi, putting his belt on the line against Austin Vanderford, the undefeated contender. Now, it's a big one at 185 pounds, but I kind of wonder about this card as a whole. As you look at this, is this kind of a one-and-done thing for you on your viewing pleasure for Friday, or is there something else on the card that's kind of catching your eye ahead of time that you're really going to be dialed in for? Let's put 4 minutes on the clock. George, you kick it off.
It certainly is top heavy. I've been critical of Bellator with this. I wish they'd have less events and just have more stacked cards. Look how pumped up we are for that one that has Pitbull versus McKee, the conclusion of the Grand Prix. Old Aaron Pico is going to mix it up with Jeremy Kennedy from Extreme Couture. That's one where you're going to sit down the whole night. But this one, it's really, really top heavy, man. That's a quality main event. Don't get me wrong. Mousasi's a great champion, a great fighter who's been doing this for a long time, and you can tell there's not many years left. And they got themselves a credible number one contender in Austin Vanderford. I have no problem with the main event. But other than that, I mean, you start scrolling, you look for some names, and I mean, other than me having to do my job and you know, focus on the rankings, I have to pay a lot of attention to Leo McCourt, who, by the way, I think is a phenomenal fighter. No, for me, it's mostly a top heavy card for me, and I probably, if I can make some time, sure, I'll watch, you know, as much of the card as I can, but otherwise I'm probably going to spend most of my time on those two fights I mentioned.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I think those are the ones most people are going to be talking about, especially as you turn in terms of what matters, right? Rankings and that sort of thing. So I think it's a fair criticism to make in terms of maybe a little bit more depth. But what about you, Nolan? Are there names on there that are kind of sticking out to you?
Yeah, I mean, you guys know me. You could give me a card of like local fighters here, and I would probably be able to at least mentally psych myself up for a few of them. So take everything I say with a grain of salt when you hear me say things like this. But I do think that there are some fighters to watch on this card. Hassan Magomed Sharapov's Zabit's brother, obviously somebody that Bellator is really highly touted, you know, since his debut back in July in Inglewood. I think he's somebody to watch. He's fighting an 11-0 fighter out of Spain who, granted, I don't know how good the Spanish, you know, Spain regional scene is and what kind of record that is and who he's fought. But hey, I mean, somebody's always got to go, and I think it was smart of them to bump him up to the main card, which they announced that they're going to be doing today. They announced that, so I think he's somebody to watch. And then the other one's Jornel Lugo. He's going in fighting Brian Moore, who's from Ireland, kind of in Moore's obviously in his home country, and I think Jornel Lugo is one of the brightest prospects that Bellator has right now. I mean, he's kind of in that position where can we even call him a prospect anymore just because he is that good? So I expect him to go out there and kind of play spoiler, and I'm excited to see some of these budding stars that Bellator, you know, is having put in the work before they start putting them in sort of contender title fights.
That's the thing, man. We talk about a crowded landscape, and you're right. I think those are some great names in terms of hardcores. You know, in terms of hardcore. We want to see everything, right? And Hassan, I think, is the one that stands out as far as Zabit's brother. A lot of people around him say better than Zabit. You know, light years above Zabit, which is crazy to think about. But again, you know, where do casuals fall, and what do they see? It's a tough balance to strike. Danny, what about you? Anything standing out to you outside of those?
Yeah, I think the criticism of it being top heavy, I think it's fair, but I would say that for the European crowd, I know there's a lot of names here that stand out, and you know those Dublin fans, they're going to go crazy, and there are some good names I feel like for the European scene, maybe not so much for the Americans. But another fight that I'd like to highlight, Brett Johns returns for his second Bellator fight against Khrushchev Khachorov. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, but Brett Johns lost his Bellator debut against Danny Sabatello, who Danny Sabatello is a very, very exciting prospect and looks to be very, very good, trains out of American Top Team. So no shame in losing to that guy. And look, I've always been high on Brett Johns. I thought his UFC run was quite good. He ended it on a 2-fight win streak from what I remember, and always thought he was one of the more exciting fighters in that division. So I'm all in on Brett Johns, and I don't think that his book is finished yet. I don't think that, you know, he's done in mixed martial arts, and these are just kind of fights to finish off his career. I very much feel like he has a lot to offer at Bellator and in that division. So who knows? Maybe this is the beginning of a title run.
That's a great call right there. I was a little bit surprised when Brett Johns left the UFC, if I'm being honest with you. I mean, I think he's a very, very talented fighter. It's interesting that they have him on the prelims, but I know sometimes they do that for specific reasons because they're broadcasting it to certain areas. So that may be the reason he's on the prelims, but Brett Johns, certainly a name worth watching. I'm going to throw one out. How about Junior Morgan? I mean, I'm just saying, it's Morgan. Keep an eye on him. All right, guys. Once all the MMA died down this past weekend, I did get a chance to tune into some of the NBA's All-Star festivities, which is always a fun weekend for basketball fan. It had me think a little bit about International Fight Week. It's coming up for the UFC in July, and for very obvious reasons, we haven't been able to have a real International Fight Week over the last couple of years. But now that it's coming back, I do wonder, is there anything you think that we could incorporate from what like other major sports do around their celebration weekends, we'll say, that would work well for the UFC and International Fight Week to maybe help that develop even further? Let's get a little wild, get a little creative. Nolan, let's put 4 minutes on the clock and you kick it off.
Yeah, I mean, look at other sports, right? The big concern is that that athletes are going to get hurt, right? Oh, does so-and-so want to partake in the All-Star game or the All-Star weekend? And I think with MMA, that risk is always inherent. So you can't really go out there and do too many like contact things. But hey, I mean, look what happened earlier this year. Late last year, Fury grappling. I mean, that seems like something that, to me, with some promotion wants to come along and kind of have an MMA-centric grappling promotion the night before. I think that would be great. Take the pressure off the UFC, who used to do those 2-3 events per week in a row for International Fight Week, which I think there's a reason that they're not necessarily doing that anymore besides COVID. And that's just kind of that, having that many fights in a weekend's difficult. I think it's difficult for everyone, for viewers, but if you want to suck the hardcores in, if you want to give the people that are traveling out there a little bit more opportunity to see their favorite fighters compete in some capacity, I think that the Fury grappling idea is phenomenal. I think we saw how popular it was at the time. It was trending in the top 10, I think, on Twitter that night, which is very impressive for any sort of thing that's streaming on Fight Pass. I think that's considered a success. So get some big names that are going to be out there anyway. The UFC is doing appearances, whatever. Get them, bring in some other people from the world of grappling, from the world of wrestling, even some fighters maybe that are outside the UFC, and let's have some fun with it. Let's have it the night before, make it a tradition, another part of International Fight Week.
Listen, selfishly, of course, man, because I was on the call. I'd love to see it happen, man. We had such a blast at Fury Grappling and seeing those UFC veterans doing it, man. To me, I think it's a no-brainer. I hope it gets done. Danny, what about you? What do you think we could add to the weekend?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea by Nolan, and I think that the UFC had done it like many years ago. I remember, I think it was Grappler's Quest that was in charge of putting that tournament together, and Diego Sanchez competed in it and absolutely killed it, and it was fun to watch, man. These UFC guys grappling, like, you definitely see a different look, and there's excitement behind that. So I'm all for that. And look, I know times are weird with COVID, restrictions are kind of lifting, but we have variants that come and go and all that. But I think the fan interaction is very important. Recently, we did a story on MMA Junkie on some fan meeting Brandon Moreno that had traveled all the way from Mexico, and he was crying, and it was just such a huge moment for him. And those are nice moments to see in mixed martial arts. And I also like to throw out there the panels, man, the Q&A panels with the fans. Obviously, like media, I think we probably get, or we do get the best questions, and obviously the more prominent information. But it's also kind of fun to see fans ask some questions, because sometimes they have a bit of a different outlook. So I very much enjoy that too. But yeah, I know George is a man of ideas, so I'm sure he's got plenty more than me.
Well, George, do you? Put you on the spot.
No, we're done. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. On Tough, Dana White's favorite episode of every season is the Coach's Challenge. And they all get into it. You got to sprinkle some money here and there because those fighters obviously are cheering because they want a piece of that. But, man, you get to know these MMA fighters by covering. The one thing you always know is they have competitive juices. They want to win whatever it is you put in front of them. So I would say, look, if you want to do the non-contact thing, because Nolan's right. I remember there was a baseball relay contest where somebody threw their shoulder out. May have even been Canseco. I remember R.W. McQuarters at the Pro Bowl. He was a DB out of Oklahoma State. He tore his knee in beach football, flag football or something like that. So I get it. But I'm telling you, the punching machine that you've seen on Fox, I've seen these guys do that at a military installation, and there was a lot of people gathered around, to see who could get the highest score, maybe group them into teams, bring in some tough alums, bring in some of the veterans. You saw how everyone lit up when Mark Coleman was and featured in one of those embedded shows. Ping pong, anything involving cooking and food, do it, man. Do something different, but bring a lot of your stars out there. I hate those long autograph lines. They drive me nuts. I mean, have some of that, but don't overdo it with that.
I would say, and you kind of bring some of the legends out, man. I want to see the legends around more. I don't think sometimes they get their due. It's kind of cool to see the greatest team of all. You know, that's awesome to see. If we could have more of the legends of the sport around to kind of educate and just let them get their moment in the spotlight, I think that would be cool. And then, of course, Fury grappling. I'm just saying, let's do it. Let's get it done. All right, guys, listen, you thought last week it was busy. Check this out. One championship, Bellator, PFL, LFA, KSW, UFC, all in action this weekend. It's going to be another packed lineup. We'll talk about it all on Spinning Back.